us who you are and.
Paul Hawkins. I grew up here in Spokane, born 68 years ago, and lived in the Spokane Valley through college, then went down to BYU for undergraduate, served 2 years in Korea on an LDS mission, came back, graduated, and then went to California for a year, worked for IBM in their general products division in San Jose in balance sheet control. It was a plant site with about 10,000 people on it. Then after a year, went to law school at the University of Puget Sound, which is now Seattle University. Graduated from that, and then at the end of law school came back to Spokane. And that would be the December of 1980, early 1981.
Okay, when you finished, what brought you back here?
Well, that's a good question. In my last year of law school, we got involved in commercial real estate, and I sold a couple of apartment houses.
Okay.
And so I was able to make some money. And then we decided, Anna and I decided that Spokane would be a good place to raise our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came back, and I went to work for a brokerage company, sat for the bar exam, passed it, and then started in earnest selling commercial real estate.
Okay, well, we're gonna get into that. I kind of want to just ask about, like, kind of explain, like, or just tell us about, like, your wife and your kids and things like that. And
Okay.
just like,
Well, Anne, I met her when we were undergraduates at BYU. We were in the same church unit down there. So that's how I met her. And we dated for many months and then decided to get married. We were married in August of 1977. We had our first son in September of 1978.
mm-hmm.
The first the first month of law school, our first year. So we had him in 78. We had our daughter Emily in 79 in November, and then we had Ben in February of 1982. So we had 3 kids fairly quickly, and then we had a 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. So over a period of time there, we had 7 kids, and raised them on the South Hill here in Spokane. They attended local schools. They all became runners eventually in high school. That was kind of their forte. That's what they did well.
Where did they get that from? Because I just feel like all of, like, your kids were just, like, super inclined with the.
Well, it's a long story, but the short of it is that there was a teacher in grade school whose name was Mr. O'Brien, and he's the one that kind of got Isaac interested in running. We had done some triathlons and that kind of stuff, but Isaac just kind of got the bug. And once he got the bug, he set a good example, and everybody else kind of followed.
Mm.
And he was good at it. So at a young age, he was competitive, ran in grade school, junior high, high school, and with time became very good at it. And I think the kids saw that, and they saw success, and they wanted to replicate it. So it wasn't so much that we pushed him into it, as that he found it, the others found or saw his success, and they wanted to be able to match it or do it themselves. And they all had kind of body types that lent themselves to that.
What is it about their, like, what makes them just so, what is it about their mindset, or, like, what is it that you see that just makes them so, like, because I think running is probably, maybe other than, like, wrestling or, like,
Right.
cross-country running is probably the most difficult, at least to me. Just running a long ways, like, does
Well,
not seem fun.
Running has a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always have said that championships are won in the off-season, meaning in your training. And running is something that, it's not like catching a pass or catching a ball or playing with a team of people. If you go out and train well, you'll win. And I think that's kind of what they saw. And they were committed to training. They were committed to working at it. And they would work at it in the off-season. They had good coaching along the way. So when Isaac got to high school, there was a coach named Mike Hadway, and he had run in college and was developing a fairly good program. And this community is predicated on running. You got Bloomsday, you've had great coaches on the north side of town, a guy by the name of Pat Tyson. You had good coaching on the South Hill here with Mike Hadway. You had good coaching in the Valley with a guy named Barbero. So running in this town was something that was significant. And the community supported runners. Bloomsday set aside some money each year to send kids to California to participate in a big national competition. So the community was big in supporting it. There was resources behind it. It was acceptable in this community to be a runner and to do well at it, and you'd receive recognition for it. And if you think back to the 1960s, there was a very famous runner named Jerry Lindgren that ran here from Rogers High School. And Jerry, as a senior in high school, ran in the Olympics in Tokyo in 1964. And Jerry set the standard. And then the community embraced it, supported it. The coaches that coached Jerry came back to Spokane.
Mm-hmm.
The people that trained with Jerry came back to Spokane. So you really had, in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, a tremendously strong community for running with great runners. So you had people who served as examples. You had teams in the area that won state titles year after year. I think from the early 90s through the end of 2010 or 11, Spokane won every state title in cross country and track. I mean, for the distance runners over that 30-year period of time. It's fallen off a little bit lately, but if you can do something and you can receive recognition for it, and the community embraces you, and you go to school and you're recognized for it,
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you can get behind and do. The kids locally were ranked nationally, and Isaac, my eldest son, went to Stanford on a scholarship. My daughter Emily went to Boston University on a scholarship. My son Ben ran at BYU. My daughter Liz was asked to take part in an intramural program in running, but she was in scholarship. And then Peter went to Montana State on scholarship. Paul went to the University of Chicago on an athletic endorsement. And Tommy was our last one. And just shortly after graduation from high school, he passed away, so he didn't get the chance to go to college. But the kids were good enough to run on a national level in college, and so it helped. Running gave them their segue to their next step in life.
Okay.
So
That is super awesome. Before we get too far into this, I wanted to say something to you. Before, I usually tell everybody why, everybody that I have on my podcast, they are very important to me, or they have had a hand in my life and helping me to take that next step. And I just wanted to tell you that, I don't know if you remember this, but there was one Sunday when we were at church and you gave me the bow tie off your neck, and I will never ever forget that. And you it just things that you were always so gracious and just so kind and things like that. And I just always really appreciated you, because I just thought we'll talk about Tommy after this, but I was always I looked up to Tommy. Tommy was somebody that was a role model, and he was somebody that people just wanted to be like.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you, because I know that you had to teach all of them, and I think Peter was my was it Peter or Paul that was the coach or the teacher at Ferris? Was it Peter?
Peter went back to
Yes.
teach at
Okay.
Ferris.
So when Peter was there too, he helped me so much, because I was dang, I can't let I was never really good in school and things like that. But as soon as I had his class and stuff, I was dang, I gotta do good, because I don't want Peter to go back and tell Brother Hawkins that, and then have Brother Hawkins go tell my grandparents or something And so
I appreciate you sharing that with me, because Pete has been in teaching for 10 years now, and he enjoys it. He's transitioning now to his 10th year. He's trying to figure out, does he stay with it? Does he go on to something else? And I said, look, I think you're going to make your biggest impact in coaching and teaching and or administration. So I will share that with him and let him know.
No, please do. I just really, I don't know if you remember, my grandpa used to home teach you guys, and so we used to, I don't, if his partner didn't go, or I don't remember what it was, but I used to go with him, and it just used to be I don't know, when we were growing up, we didn't have a lot of money and things like that. So
Right.
it was just so amazing to see something that like I would never be able to see, you know. And I know it was just for like home teaching and things like that, but like I just appreciate you because you gave me an outlook that was a little bit that could be a little bit bigger than what it was in the beginning.
Well, good. That's my whole purpose in teaching was to try to give a vision to kids of something that they could do, and you've turned out well.
I appreciate you. But so let's kind of talk about Tommy real quick. Just
Okay.
kind of explain like what did he mean to you? Kind of like what, as we were talking, he was a really good runner. I thought he was. I did not remember Isaac. I just remember Tommy
Yeah.
because Tommy was like the one that I always.
Well, Isaac was kind of the gold standard in running because
Mhm.
when he was in high school, he won 6 state titles
Jeez.
individually. So he won cross country his junior year, the 1600, 3200 in track his junior year, and then he repeated again his senior year. So that made 6 titles in total. The kids were involved. If you count Isaac, 6, and then Emily came along and she won a state title in cross country. That's 7. And then Peter was on 2 teams that won 2 state team titles his junior senior year, and Paul did the same thing. He replicated that. So his junior senior year, his team won 2 state
11. What was that? 11 state titles in
11
the
state
whole house.
titles. So Tom came along. Tom came along, and that model had been set for him. That,
Mhm.
you know, this is, but Tom had a different body type in the beginning, and so Tom initially said, "I don't want to run." I said, "That's fine. You have to pick something though,
Mhm.
because I want you. There's no coming home and just sitting after school. Either you've got to have a job, or you can turn out for a sport. It's your choice, and it's your choice as to which sport you want to pick." So he initially picked to turn out for football, and he did that in junior high. And there was a guy named Paul Sorensen who was his coach, and his son Cody was on Tom's team, and there was one of the Stockton kids that was on it. So this little team in I call it Pee Wee football. I don't know if that's the right terminology. Played it, and Tom enjoyed it. He enjoyed it until he got to be about, it was 7th grade, and at a practice once he got landed on and he hurt his arm,
Mm.
and it hurt. And so the coach had to bring him home after practice. He was hurting, and I think, you know, the transitioning from junior high football to high school football was approaching. And at the football practices, they were at a point where they started to yell at the kids. It was just the coach's mindset is that,
Mhm.
you know, coaching is that you got to yell at the kids, and yelling, you know, generates a certain amount of motivation, I guess. Tom didn't like that. So he'd seen what his brothers had done, and his body type was a little different. He was a little bit heavier than the other kids. So he said he wanted to run, so he turned out for track in his 8th grade, and he did okay at it. I mean, he wasn't winning races, but he was getting better week by week, and he was slimming down. So he decided then in high school to turn out for cross country and track like the other kids had done, and he worked at it really hard. Now, if you anticipate that before him are 11 state titles, and he comes along, so the expectation is you're gonna win a state
Continue
title
on the legacy.
in
Yeah.
the legacy. And Tommy trained as hard as the other kids did, but he just didn't have the same results.
Mm.
And you could see it. You could see it in their times. I mean, you can always. The thing about track and cross country, or cross country and track, is that you can measure people based on their time, and you know this time means that these kind of doors are going to open up for them. And if they can run this time as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, you can almost lay it out on paper as to what's going to happen. And Tom's times fell a little bit short, and so you can see as a freshman he didn't do quite as well as the others had done as a freshman. The same thing with his sophomore, junior, senior years. And he got into a senior year of high school, and he was working at it really hard. They had made him one of the captains of the team, but they had a meet at the beginning of the season called the Tracy Walters Invite. And in cross country, you run 7 kids, you score 5. At the Tracy Walters Invite, they allowed you to run 9 kids per team, and they would still only score the first 5.
Mm.
So, and that would be the test you used to see would be on varsity that year. So Tom ran in that. He was in a great spot about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the race. And then he fell off at the end. And at the end of the race, he says, my heart, something didn't feel right. And I said, well, you're trying to run 3 miles under 6 minutes. Your heart's not going to feel right because it's a lot of work. And he kind of stayed in that same spot on the team for the rest of the season. He was about 8th or 9th. So he never really made the varsity per se, though he was the captain of the team. But he would go and put in his work, he'd put in his practice, he'd do everything that needed to be done. He probably just didn't have the results that the others had had. Mm. And not knowing that at the time, he had a heart condition. Okay, we just had no idea. And when he had mentioned that to me in the fall, I thought, hey, he's a bigger kid, he's a little taller, he's carrying more weight, he's running fast by most standards, he's just not running fast by the standards of this team. So he got through his cross country his senior year. When it came springtime of his senior year, rather than turning out for track, he decided to do triathlons. So he and I were training to do some triathlons. And I remember going down and swimming with him. And I had grown up as a swimmer as a kid. But by the end of our training, 6 weeks into it, where in the beginning I was beating him in the swimming, by the end of it he was beating me in the swimming. And then about that time too, he decided to go out and start his own little business. So he had a Tom's Repair handyman kind of a thing. So he did yard work and did all kinds of odd jobs for people. Handed out flyers, and he really built it up into a little business. So he was fulfilling my requirement. Look, you don't have to do any of these things, but what you have to do is you either have to take part in a sport or you have to work. And so he was working the springtime of his senior year, and it just carried through the summer. And he was getting big, he was getting strong, he was doing weightlifting, and he was just turning into a great young man. And then it was September 3rd of 2011, and on September 3rd he was going to head away to BYU, Idaho on September 5th. So September 3rd would be the weekend, the Labor Day weekend, and so he and I went. We rode to the top of Mount Spokane with some other guys, and he beat me to the top of the mountain. Yeah, because I remember he pulled away, he went out, summited, and then came back down. There's a state park about a mile off the top. And I was coming up to that park about that time, and he says, I'm just going to go in here and lay down on this table. It was a cold morning. The sun was out, so he's going to go lay on the table, get heated by the sun. And then I'd go to the top, come back down, and we'd meet up, and then we'd go back down, which we did. And I remember coasting off the mountain behind him, and I thought, boy, he's a good kid. He's good. He's a hard worker. He's a good-looking kid, etc. We got down to the bottom, and he said, I said, why don't we just go to lunch? Because it was late morning by that time. And he said, sure. And so we went up to Five Guys that was here on the South Hill. I remember it was 11 o'clock because the store had just opened. The door wasn't open as we got there. The gal was coming to the door to open it. We went in, ordered our hamburgers, went outside, sat down, and it was just a nice, beautiful day. The sun was out. We'd had this great ride. And I remember sitting at that table and thinking to myself, I need to tell him I love him. And it just was an impression that I had. And so I said, Tom, I love you. Because he was going to take off in 2 days to go down to school. And he said, no, I love you too. And he said, he said he needed to go pick up some stuff for school. Could he use my car? And I said, sure. And I normally didn't let him use my car because they had an old crappy truck, and I'd rather that he drive the old crappy truck. And so he wanted to know if he could take my car to put some things in it, and I said, sure. So he came home, got cleaned up, went out to buy some things. And then while he was away, he was at Shopko trying to buy some linens or something. Called his mom, said, hey, I'm looking for some stuff. And she goes, why don't you just come home? I think I've got enough extra stuff that you won't need to buy it. So you can just come home and get ready. And again, on Monday, we were all supposed to head down to Idaho together. We're going to drop him off. On his way home up by the cemetery at 65th, he had just rounded the corner, and apparently in the car at that point he passed out, because the car then went up onto a lawn and stopped. And a person coming the other direction could see this didn't look right, a car driving up onto somebody's lawn, so they stopped to see what it was, and he had passed out inside the car. And so coming behind him about this, not the same time, but shortly thereafter, was Paul, and he was coming in another direction with his car. And he could see that my car was up on the grass, Thomas inside. This neighbor was there trying to figure out what to do. And so Paul gave me a call and said, hey, there's been an accident here involving Tommy. There's no blood or anything, but he's unconscious and you might want to come and get here real quick. So I left here and drove up there quickly to see it. And just as I got there, they were breaking the window to open the door to get him out and lay him on the grass. The fire department was there, and they were trying to revive him. And to make a long story short, he had dilated cardiomyopathy. So he had an enlarged heart that nobody knew about, and it had gone into an arrhythmia, meaning that it was not operating like it normally should. That caused him to faint, and they couldn't get the arrhythmia to stop. So they took him in an ambulance down to the hospital. They took him to the emergency room. We followed down. We were in there in the emergency room with him as they're working on him. They spent about another 45 minutes trying to revive him, give him all sorts of shots and medical advice and different things. Now, do you remember Dave Thorne, Adam and Travis Thorne?
Yes.
So Dave is an interventional radiologist, and he lives back behind us here, and those kids had grown up with Tom and Paul. So Dave happened to be at the hospital, and he was looking at the situation, knowing that we're an hour and a half into it. He says, look, they can't do anything more with him. They're not being able to revive him. The heart's not responding the way it should. If he were to revive at this point, he's been passed out now for probably an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. He will not be the same kid that you knew this morning, meaning that there would be some brain damage that would have occurred. And he says they're not able to stabilize the situation, so effectively he's dead. So we went from this bike ride in the morning to by 2 in the afternoon he's passed away. And again, there was an athlete named Hank Gathers that played for LMU out of LA. And Hank was on the basketball court, went up for a lay-in, a shot in a game, and passed out. And Hank died of the same thing. It was just dilated cardiomyopathy, an enlarged heart that nobody knew about. It went into an arrhythmia, and they die. And it's, you could diagnose it if you did an ultrasound on everybody's heart, but it's cost prohibitive, and you don't give any signs that there's anything that's wrong until it stops. So that's what killed Tom, was this enlarged heart. That explains his ability to run well, but maybe not run at he was competitive, but run at an elite level like his brothers and sisters had done. He just had a defective heart that didn't allow him to do that. But to run at that elite level, you need to have everything work out. You have to have a great heart, lungs, you have to train, all those things have got to fall into place. But if one piece of it is got a chink in it, or it's not working right, then it's just not going to work the way it should. So that was the story of Tom and his passing. So at 19 he passes away, and it was a shock to the family. It was just a shock to all of us. We thought we were taking him away to school. He would be leaving that way. He wasn't. He was in the process of dying, but we just didn't know it. And I remember we used to be in the house here, and we would joke, and he would say, I'm the last one. You're going to miss me when I'm gone. I said, no, you're going to miss us when you're gone. I said, you're not going to have your mom's cooking, etc. And he says, no, you're going to miss me. And he was right. He won that argument. We miss him. I wish he was here. I just wish he was here with all my heart. But he gives us something to look up to look forward to try to be like. Mm-hmm. And as you said, Tom was a good kid. He was nice to people. He was a big kid. He was strong. He was a good worker. I mean, he was everything that you'd want in a son, and you know, I miss him. I've missed him over these past 10, 11 years, but I know we'll see him again someday, and we'll be together. So that gives me hope, and I look forward to that. It gives me something to live for, in the anticipation that I will be with him someday, and that I will be able to be in his presence.
Yeah, I 100% I agree with you. Tommy is just like, I don't know. He was the hardest. Like he was a hard worker for somebody. I always used to tell like I would tell my mom this like I never like I had friends that would be like in that like type of like position. I just never like he didn't need to work. That was my thing. Like he didn't need to do all those things, and I just appreciated you, and that's why I wanted to tell you earlier too that I appreciated you because like I don't know like they like your kids didn't have to work or things like that. They didn't have to go out and do sports. They could have just
Well, and I had
floated
told,
along.
I said, look, there's not going to be no handouts here. So if we'll provide you a framework that you can succeed in, but you have to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whatever success I've had is one thing, but if you want success, then you need to build upon what we've got. We'll support you in terms of you know, if you need things along the way, if you need shoes, if you need coaching, if you need that, we can support you in that regard. But what I can't do is I can't put in the miles for you. I can't train for you. You know, if you're going to be a knucklehead in school, that's on you. You know, in life when you're done, I'm not going to give you things just because you were born here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no freebie that comes out of this thing. I remember telling the kids once, because we had this house when Tom entered high school, and Tom made some comment about some girl, you know, making comment about the house. I said, well, she's being nice to you because you live in this house, so she really likes me, not you. So, you know, it's not something you've done. You know, she looks at this house, well, this is something your mom and I did. And I just was trying to make the point, look, you know, just because, you know, you live in a nice house means nothing. You know, it doesn't qualify you as a person. It doesn't give you talents or abilities that you don't have. You know, if you're a bum, you're a bum.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you've got to make your way. And that's why in part, you know, we had nice cars, but I didn't want them to drive nice cars. He had an old beat up.
The blue, wasn't it blue or
red
the
pickup.
red pickup? Yes.
And I remember at one point in high school, he locked his keys in the car. We tried to get the AAA to come and unlock it. They said we can't. They said we're gonna have to break a window. I said fine. Which window should we break? And AAA said, well, you got to break the one right behind his head, because that's one that you'll never look out. I said fine, let's break that one. And we never fixed it. I mean, it was just, you know, this is a beat up truck,
Mm-hmm.
and it was designed to be a kid's car, and everybody would recognize it. And this is the car that you, and here was the other condition, is that they were permitted to use the car to go to school and come back home, provided they did a sport at school.
Mm-hmm.
If they were just gonna come home and go to work, they had to take the bus.
Really?
Yeah. So they were kind of motivated to turn out, to participate,
Mm-hmm.
to take part, because then they got access to this old beat up car that was then theirs. And so I tried to
Little incentives.
tried to create little incentives along the way that would
Mm-hmm.
get them engaged. I never tried to make decisions for them. You know, I didn't say you could date this person, can't date that person. You decide who you date. I don't care. But just rotate it up a little bit, because I don't want you getting too serious with somebody in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So we had this silly rule. You could date somebody twice, and then you had to date somebody else a third time. And then if you wanted to go back and date that same person again, you could.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be 2, 1, 2, 1. And that way it kept all of them from getting serious with anybody in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, it worked for us. It gave them total control over their dating and social life, with just that one caveat, that one condition. And then they had a car that they could drive, provided they were working out and doing their things.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did.
I kind of want to get into. I want to talk about what were the differences that you seen when you went on your mission when you were a young man compared to when you and your wife went on a mission. What were some of the things that you just seen that you were like, dang, like
Yeah, well, what I saw in part, I mean, I went as a 19-year-old. Now they allow them to go as 18-year-olds, but I went as a 19-year-old, and that time frame changed here a few years back. But it was a chance to be away from home, and for 2 years.
Where did you say you served again?
I served the first mission to Korea, so I was in
Korea.
South Korea, and so I had to learn the language, and that was a bearcat. That was probably one of the hardest things that I'd ever had to do. To learn a foreign language, to try to be able to communicate with people, and to try to understand what they were saying in return. And it was just brutal. And we used to they had discussions that you would teach, and these discussions were 270 pages. And they were broken up into 7 discussions, I think. And as a foreigner coming in trying to learn Korean, you couldn't just wag it. You had to actually memorize it word for word. And so that was my strength. I could memorize things.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked really hard. It took me 6 months to memorize those discussions. But that gave me some sentence structure, some vocabulary that I could use, etc. And I worked at it really, really hard because I wanted to be there and I wanted to try to do a good job. But you can't really do a good job if you can't talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't talk to people until you learn the language. And it's a hard, brutal process to go through. I've talked to missionaries who went down to Mexico, and they were able to pick up their languages much quicker, but we were in Korea. It's an Oriental language.
It's a hard language.
It's a hard language.
It's one of the hardest.
The sentence structure starts with, is kind of backwards to English, how we think. We might speak we would say in a sentence, I know this to be true. In Korean, you would say, I think, truth, no. So you end with your verb. And you've got to kind of think in that way. And so you've got to change your thinking of sentence structure, you've got to change your thinking of word pronunciations, and there's no words in Korean that sound like English. So every word is a sound, it's a phonetic sound, and it's hard. It is just hard. But I think the discipline of doing that and working hard was good, and then you began, once you had that ability down, you had the ability to teach people. And so to me, missionary work was about working hard. Now, what did I see 40 years, 50 years later when Anna and I went out? We went to Australia so I could actually understand everything that was being said. And I remember standing there in Australia the first week or so, and I thought to myself, these guys have got a different pronunciation, but at least I understand everything
they're saying.
So I remember that, and I felt, this is different. This is kind of nice. But the thing I noticed over those years of time is that young missionaries do well if they know how to talk to people. And many young, and this is not just missionaries, many young people just don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to engage. They don't know how to start a conversation. They don't know how to ask somebody about, tell me your story. Tell me where you came from, what you're doing, what you're interested in, etc. And that process of trying to learn how to communicate with an older person, I call it bedside manner. And you might think of doctors. There are certain doctors that you go into, you talk to, they make you feel good because they are listening to you, they're giving you good advice, etc. And I have always said in business, that's the key. You have to have good bedside manner. If you want to succeed in business, you have to be able to talk to somebody. And that's probably more important than any book learning that you've ever gotten. But if you can talk to somebody, listen to them, understand what they're saying, have empathy for what they're trying to do, and you're in the business world and you've got something to sell or a service to provide, if you can understand what your customer client is saying or thinking, then you've got a chance, to make some money. So what I've seen over 50 years is back in the day when we came out of school, there weren't any video games, there weren't any Xboxes, there was a TV with 3 channels on it, but we, just went outside and played. And I see that that's kind of a detriment to today. People don't have to engage with anybody. They can stay on their little handheld devices. They can look at them forever and a day. They don't have to talk to anybody. And I saw that in missionaries coming out in the when we served in 2017. These young guys had a hard time talking. That was their biggest impediment to succeeding. But with time, with no Xboxes, no games to play.
Yeah.
Over time, they got better at it. By the end of their mission, they actually could engage with people and talk to them. And I always said that anybody that can talk to somebody is a superstar. It's the inability to talk, it's the inability to communicate that holds people back many times. But, we tried to, in this house, tried to always have interesting conversations. It wasn't necessarily by design, but we just, me, I'm kind of a vocal guy. My kids know what I'm thinking. If I walk in and see something I don't like, I don't hide it. I say I don't like this for this reason, and we'll have a conversation about it. And I think we tried to make it so that they could say the same things in return. They didn't feel that they couldn't say certain things around me. I don't like this, or I don't believe that, or etc. And we talk about it. We discuss it. But we tried to spend time with the kids. We tried to encourage them in all that they did. The highlight of raising kids for me was just being able to be at their activities. And I have it on record that I was at every one of their activities except for my daughter Liz's 8th grade all-city cross-country meet, and I came after it had finished. I was just late getting away from business, and so I have to apologize her for not being there. And she says, "Hey, it's no big deal. I didn't know that you weren't there." But I think that's the point, is that you try to be there so that you can see what they're doing, so that you can talk about it afterwards. And in this cross-country stuff, we would go away to a meet in Portland, let's say. Well, it takes 6 hours to drive to Portland. You're going to watch a race that's going to last 10, 15 minutes, and then you're going to drive home. But it's 10 hours, 12 hours of time that you've got together as a family. And so we talk about the race going down, we watch the race, we analyze and digest the race coming home. So all the kids got the benefit of those years of doing that and seeing that. And so by the time Pete and Paul came along, they knew the drill.
Yeah.
They knew what it was about. They knew how their race would be critiqued afterwards, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. And everybody had their challenges, nobody came out of the mold the same. And Peter even at one point thought about quitting. In his junior year, I remember it was the summertime, and I would come home and I could tell, you can tell as a parent kind of what your kids are doing based on how they're acting. And I knew that when kids train and they run these long miles, and during the summertime, if they're averaging 60, 70, 80 miles a week, it's exhausting. So it was towards the end of summer, his junior year, the start of his junior year, between his sophomore and junior year, and I could tell that he didn't seem quite tired. He didn't seem like he had been out there training. And being this candid thing, talking about anything that happens, I said, "Pete, I don't think you've been training." I said, "Tell me what's going on." And he said, "Yeah, I haven't." He says, "I think I'm going to quit." And which shocked me, because all of our kids had done it up to that point. He said he was going to quit.
And he was no scrub either.
Well, there's no scrub, but he had some good kids on his team that were beating him, and I think he was getting a little discouraged. So I had to think quickly. I thought to myself, what do I do? I can't say he can't quit. But what I did think is he's got to tell his older brother now, Isaac, who was away at Stanford on a scholarship down there. And Isaac was on a team that was going to win several national titles. So he wasn't the top runner any longer at Stanford. In high school, he was always the top dog, the state champion. But when he was at Stanford, they're all state champions. They're all good. And so I said, look, if you're going to quit, then you're going to tell your brother Isaac that you're quitting, and you're going to explain to him why. So immediately I took out my cell phone, called Isaac, which caught him by surprise. I said, "Hey, I'm catching you by surprise. I'm standing here with Pete. Pete says he's going to quit. He's going to have to explain it to you. And so he and Isaac and Pete have this great conversation that lasts for probably 20, 30 minutes. And Pete explains how, the competition is tough. He's not winning like he wants to. Isaac says, hey, you think it's tough there? I'm down here doing the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy. People are beating me, et cetera, et cetera. By the end of the conversation, Peter was recommitted to keeping up with it. His only problem was he was behind now because the season's going to start in a month, and I know that his training's not been as good as it should be. So we have to double time it. He has to do as much running as he can do without getting hurt, and then we start picking up cycling because you can do a lot of cycling that's not going to pound you to try to get your aerobic system built back up. And that fall, there was a race that he competed in against Ryan. He was the runner at Central Catholic. He goes on to take the silver medal at the Olympics. I want to say Ryan Hall, but that's not right. It'll come to me. Anyhow, he's a great runner. He Pete's in this race. This kid from Central Catholic finishes first. Peter finishes dead last, almost for the entire race. Now you've got, 30, 40 teams in this race, and the state title is 6 weeks away, or the state championship meet is 6 weeks away. So Hadway, the coach, takes him and a couple of guys on the team and puts him in the back of the car, in my car on the way home, and has this conversation with him. Says, look, we're going to enter the state championship as one of the favorites, but the difference is going to be one of you three guys here, sitting here. And the question is, which one of you is going to step up and make it happen? So Pete in August was quitting. This is October-ish. The state meet's coming up in November. And so...
Oh yeah, this is all within like 3 months.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So the state meet is approaching. The state meet occurs. We're at the meet, and after watching enough meets, you can get a feel for scoring kind of quickly. You're scoring the top 5 runners, and you knew which teams you were competing against, so it's important that your 5th runner gets in before the other 1 or 2 teams that really has a chance for the title gets their 5th runner in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in Pasco on this course, and the first mile you can see where they're at, the second mile you can't see where they're at, and as a crest in the hill for the last homecoming stretch, you can see where everybody's at. And I can count our team up, and all of a sudden we're in contention to win the state title. But our 5th guy is going to decide the race. And in this race on that day, at that time, it was Pete. So he was running up the hill, and you have to go up this little hill, and you go down about a quarter mile to the finish line. And Pete was ahead of the kids from Meade, and he was ahead of the kids from Eisenhower, who were the other 2 teams that we were competing against. So Pete finishes that race in a strong position, and because of Pete's finish, Ferris wins the state title. Because, again, you take your top 5 runners, and your 5th runner is going to give you the most points. And it's like a golf score. You want the least amount of points possible. So if your 5th guy comes in 100th, he's going to give you 100 points. So your 5th guy in a race like that's got to be in about 40th, 50th. So it gives you only that many points. And then you add up the points for the team and compare it to the other points in the other team. Well, Pete's effort that day is what cinched the title for the team. So from that point forward, Peter was fully committed, never looked back. And then the following year, they repeated as the state champions. And then Montana State comes over and recruits him and says, we'd like you to come and run for us.
Yeah, go Cats.
Yeah. So it's a great story just in terms of how it unfolded. But, it's one of those things that I couldn't run these races for these kids. I couldn't do any of their training for them. It's either they did it or they didn't do it. And either they were committed or they weren't. And either they had it in their heart or they didn't. So, it worked out well that day. But Isaac established the pattern. Emily followed it. Peter came along and established the pattern again. Paul came after him, and it worked out. And it served our family well. So
The blueprint.
yeah.
Blueprint to success. I like that. Who were some people that influenced you when you were growing up?
Well, the, my family had the greatest impact on me, and I had an uncle